Aaliyah Matthews was no stranger to disappointment. At 16 years old, she had spent most of her life bouncing between foster homes, each one a temporary stop in a long, exhausting journey. Abandoned as a baby at the steps of a hospital, she had no memory of her biological parents, only the vague stories pieced together from social workers and case files. Her life was defined by instability, packing her belongings into garbage bags every time a placement didn't work out, saying goodbye to people who barely got to know her, and pretending to be okay when every goodbye chipped away at her hope. The foster system wasn't kind to girls like Aaliyah, black, smart, and fiercely independent. She quickly learned that her strength was both her armor and her obstacle. Families often labeled her as difficult or too grown for her age, failing to see that her defiance was a shield against the pain of rejection. At school, she excelled academically, but the whispers about her foster care status followed her. Teachers praised her intelligence but pitted her situation, a dynamic that left her feeling alienated. Still, Aaliyah dreamed of something better, a family who would truly love her, a place to call home, and someone to tell her she was enough. Her current placement was no different. She lived with the Johnsons, an older couple who viewed fostering as a paycheck rather than a calling. They provided the bare minimum: meals, a bed, and a roof over her head. Emotional support, however, was a luxury Aaliyah couldn't afford. She spent most of her time at the library, escaping into books that promised happier endings than her own. Her favorite novel was To Kill a Mockingbird, and she often wondered if people like Atticus Finch existed in real life, people who stood for justice and didn't give up on the underdog. Despite her struggles, Aaliyah refused to let her circumstances define her. She volunteered at the community center, tutoring younger kids who reminded her of herself, kids who needed someone to believe in them. She had a sharp mind and a natural talent for connecting with others, but her dreams often felt just out of reach. She wanted to be a lawyer someday, a voice for kids like her who felt invisible. But how could she fight for others when no one was fighting for her? One morning, Aaliyah's social worker, Ms. Ramirez, arrived with news that would change everything. "You have a hearing next week," she said, her tone neutral as always. "It's about finding a new placement. Your current family has decided they can't take care of you anymore." Aaliyah's heart sank. Another move. Another goodbye. She tried to mask her frustration, but the tears threatened to spill over. "Who's the judge?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Judge Olivia Carter," Ms. Ramirez replied. "She's new to the family court circuit, but she has a reputation for being fair." Aaliyah nodded, unsure what to expect. She had been through countless hearings, each one blurring into the next. Judges were just faces behind a bench, people who made decisions about her life without truly knowing her. But something about Judge Carter's name lingered in her mind. It felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. The week leading up to the hearing was a blur of anxiety and unanswered questions. Aaliyah spent her nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if this time would be different. Would this judge see her as more than just a case file? Would she finally find a family who wouldn't give up on her? Or was she destined to age out of the system, another statistic in a broken cycle? When the day of the hearing arrived, Aaliyah dressed in her best outfit, a simple blouse and jeans she had bought with her tutoring money. She wanted to make a good impression, even if it felt pointless. Ms. Ramirez picked her up and drove her to the courthouse, a towering building that seemed designed to make people feel small. As Aaliyah walked through the metal detectors and down the sterile hallways, she couldn't shake the sense that something significant was about to happen. When she entered the courtroom, her eyes immediately went to the bench. Judge Olivia Carter sat there, her presence commanding yet calm. She was a striking woman in her late 40s, with warm brown skin, piercing eyes, and an air of quiet authority. Aaliyah felt an odd sense of familiarity, as though she had seen this woman before. But that was impossible, or was it? As the hearing began, Aaliyah listened intently, her heart pounding with every word. This wasn't just another hearing. This was the moment her life would change forever, though she had no idea how. The courtroom was colder than Aaliyah had anticipated, the kind of cold that seemed to seep into your bones and amplify your nerves. She sat stiffly in her chair, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. To her right was her social worker, Ms. Ramirez, who occasionally leaned over to whisper reassurances that did little to calm her racing thoughts. To her left sat the Johnsons, her soon-to-be former foster parents, their expressions indifferent as if they were simply attending another routine errand. For them, this was just paperwork. For Aaliyah, it was yet another upheaval in a life full of them. Judge Olivia Carter presided over the hearing with a calm yet commanding presence. She wore a black robe that seemed to amplify her authority, her sharp eyes scanning the room with a focus that left no detail unnoticed. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and firm but carried an undertone of empathy that made Aaliyah pause. Judges were usually distant, detached figures who rattled off decisions without looking at her, but something about Judge Carter felt different. She looked at Aaliyah, not through her, not around her, but at her. This hearing is to determine the next steps in the placement of Aaliyah Matthews, Judge Carter began, her voice resonating through the quiet room. I've reviewed the case file, but I'd like to hear from everyone present before making any decisions. The Johnsons were the first to speak. Their words were clinical and detached, filled with phrases like, not a good fit and too much responsibility. Aaliyah stared down at her shoes, her chest tightening with each word. She hated this part, the feeling of being dissected, of having her worth measured and found lacking. She clenched her fists, determined not to let them see her cry. When it was Ms. Ramirez's turn, she recited the usual details: Aaliyah's age, her academic achievements, her history in the foster system. Her words were kind but impersonal, as if she were reading a script. Aaliyah felt invisible, reduced to a collection of statistics and bullet points. Finally, it was Aaliyah's turn. Judge Carter turned to her, her expression softening. Aaliyah, I'd like to hear from you directly. How do you feel about your current situation, and what are your hopes moving forward? Aaliyah hesitated, her throat dry. No judge had ever asked her that before. They usually made decisions based on the adults in the room, never caring to hear her voice. She glanced at Ms. Ramirez, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. Aaliyah began, her voice trembling. She cleared her throat and tried again. I just want a home. A real home. I want to feel like I matter, like I belong somewhere. I've worked hard to prove I'm worth it, but no matter what I do, it feels like it's never enough. Her voice cracked, and she paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. I want a family who won't give up on me, she continued, her words pouring out like a flood. Someone who sees me for who I am, not just as another foster kid. I don't want to keep packing my life into garbage bags and starting over every few months. I just want to be loved. The courtroom fell silent. Even the Johnsons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to meet her gaze. Aaliyah's vulnerability hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Judge Carter leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Aaliyah, the judge said after a moment. That was very brave of you to share. Aaliyah felt a flicker of surprise. Brave? No one had ever called her that before. For the first time, she felt like someone was truly listening to her. Judge Carter turned her attention back to the room. I've heard enough to make a decision, she said. But before I do, I'd like to speak with Aaliyah privately. The request sent a ripple of surprise through the courtroom, but no one objected. Aaliyah followed the judge into her chambers, her heart pounding with anticipation. The room was small and warmly lit, a stark contrast to the sterile courtroom. Judge Carter gestured for her to sit on a plush chair across from her desk. I wanted to speak with you away from the formality of the courtroom, Judge Carter said, her tone softer now. You've been through a lot, Aaliyah, and I want you to know that I see you, not just as a case, but as a young woman with incredible potential. Aaliyah blinked, unsure how to respond. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with such genuine care. Thank you, she murmured, her voice barely audible. The judge leaned back in her chair, studying Aaliyah with an intensity that made her feel both seen and exposed. I see a lot of myself in you, Judge Carter said finally. When I was your age, I faced challenges that felt insurmountable. But someone believed in me, and it changed my life. I want to do the same for you. Aaliyah's breath caught. She searched the judge's face for any sign of insincerity, but found none. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile, delicate thing that she didn't dare fully grasp. I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure you find a home where you're loved and valued, Judge Carter continued. But I also want you to remember this. Your worth isn't defined by whether or not someone chooses you. You are enough, just as you are. Tears welled in Aaliyah's eyes. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded, her voice caught in her throat. As she left the judge's chambers, her heart felt lighter, as though a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted. Back in the courtroom, Judge Carter delivered her decision. Aaliyah would be placed with a new foster family, one that had been carefully vetted to provide the love and support she deserved. But as Aaliyah left the courthouse that day, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of her connection with Judge Carter. It was only the beginning. Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about Judge Carter. Her words lingered in Aaliyah's mind, replaying like a song she couldn't forget. "You are enough, just as you are." No one had ever said that to her before. Not her foster families, not her teachers, not even her social workers. It was as if, for the first time, someone saw the whole of her, not just the pieces defined by her circumstances. But there was something else, something Aaliyah couldn't quite put her finger on. Judge Carter's gaze had felt familiar, like looking into a mirror she hadn't realized was there. The days after the hearing were a blur of packing and preparing to move to a new foster home. The new family, the Walkers, seemed kind enough. They had a modest house with a small garden and 2 younger foster children who were quick to welcome Aaliyah into their routines. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when Aaliyah felt like an outsider, but it was better than many of the homes she had known. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about Judge Carter. Her calm presence, her genuine interest in Aaliyah's story, it all felt too significant to ignore. Weeks turned into months, and Aaliyah settled into her new life. She excelled in school, earning top grades, and even joining the debate team. But every so often, she found herself wondering what Judge Carter was doing, if she ever thought about Aaliyah. The judge had promised to do everything in her power to help, and though Aaliyah believed her, she couldn't help but wonder why she cared so much. Judges weren't supposed to get personally involved. They were supposed to make decisions and move on. So why did Judge Carter feel so invested? The answer came one afternoon when Aaliyah received an unexpected invitation. Her social worker handed her a neatly folded letter with a courthouse seal. Inside was an invitation to a mentorship program for foster youth, led by none other than Judge Olivia Carter. The program was designed to empower kids in the foster system, giving them access to resources, mentorship, and guidance as they navigated the challenges of their lives. "You should go," Ms. Ramirez said, her tone unusually encouraging. "It's a great opportunity." Aaliyah hesitated. She wasn't sure if she could face Judge Carter again. There was something about their last conversation that had stirred feelings she didn't know how to process. Hope, gratitude, and something deeper she couldn't name. But curiosity won out, and a week later, she found herself walking into the courthouse again, this time to attend the mentorship program's orientation. The room was filled with other kids from the foster system, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and cautious optimism. Judge Carter stood at the front, addressing the group with her signature blend of authority and warmth. She spoke about resilience, the importance of self-belief, and the power of community. Aaliyah couldn't take her eyes off her. Every word felt like it was meant for her, like Judge Carter was speaking directly to her soul. After the orientation, Judge Carter approached Aaliyah. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice softer now. Aaliyah nodded, her heart pounding. "Thank you for inviting me. This program, it sounds amazing." Judge Carter smiled, her expression tinged with something Aaliyah couldn't quite place. Pride? Sadness? "You have so much potential, Aaliyah," she said. "I see it in you every time we meet. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Aaliyah felt tears prick her eyes, but quickly blinked them away. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, the question spilling out before she could stop herself. "I mean, I'm just one of so many kids you've probably seen." Judge Carter's expression shifted, a flicker of emotion crossing her face before she composed herself. "Because I know what it feels like to be in your position," she said after a moment. "And because you deserve to know that someone is rooting for you." The words hit Aaliyah like a wave. She wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but Judge Carter was called away to speak with another attendee. As she watched her go, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the judge's interest in her than she was letting on. Over the following months, Aaliyah became a regular at the mentorship sessions. Judge Carter often led discussions, sharing her own struggles and triumphs in a way that made the kids feel seen and understood. Aaliyah began to open up more, sharing pieces of her story she had never told anyone else. Judge Carter always listened intently, her advice thoughtful and tailored to Aaliyah's needs. Their bond deepened in subtle ways. Judge Carter would check in on Aaliyah's progress at school, offer guidance on her career aspirations, and even attend one of her debate competitions. Aaliyah had never experienced this kind of support before, and it both comforted and confused her. Why did Judge Carter care so much? Why did she look at Aaliyah with an intensity that felt almost personal? The answer came one rainy afternoon when Aaliyah stayed late after a mentorship session to help clean up. As she gathered chairs and stacked papers, she noticed a framed photo on Judge Carter's desk. It was slightly tilted, as if placed there in haste. The photo showed a younger Judge Carter holding a newborn baby, her face glowing with joy. Aaliyah froze, her heart racing as she studied the photo. The baby in the picture had the same dark eyes, the same round cheeks that Aaliyah saw every time she looked in the mirror. It couldn't be. Could it? Before she could stop herself, Aaliyah blurted out, "Who's the baby in that picture?" Judge Carter turned, her expression unreadable as she followed Aaliyah's gaze. For a long moment, she said nothing, her silence heavy with meaning. "That's a story for another day," Judge Carter said finally, her voice tinged with emotion. "But I promise you, Aaliyah, you'll have your answers soon." Aaliyah left the courthouse that day with more questions than ever. Her connection to Judge Carter felt deeper than coincidence, and she was determined to find out why. The photograph lingered in Aaliyah's mind like a haunting melody, refusing to fade. The baby in the picture, the round cheeks, the soft eyes, was so strikingly familiar it made her chest ache. Judge Carter's cryptic response only deepened her curiosity. What answers could she possibly have? Why had she seemed reluctant, almost afraid, to explain? Aaliyah tried to focus on school, on her new foster family, on the mentorship program, but the questions gnawed at her every waking moment. Weeks later, Aaliyah decided she couldn't let it go. She stayed behind after another mentorship session, determined to ask Judge Carter directly. The courthouse was quiet, the other kids having filtered out, leaving only Aaliyah and the judge in the now empty conference room. As Judge Carter packed up her belongings, Aaliyah summoned her courage. "Judge Carter," she began, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "I need to know the truth. That baby in the picture, is it me?" The judge froze mid-motion, her hand hovering over a stack of papers. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't speak. The tension in the room was palpable, the air heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, she turned to face Aaliyah, her expression a mixture of pain and resolve. "Yes," she said quietly, "it's you." The words hit Aaliyah like a thunderclap. She felt her knees weaken, her breath catch in her throat. A million questions raced through her mind, but all she could manage was a stunned, "Why didn't you tell me?" Judge Carter sighed deeply, pulling out a chair and gesturing for Aaliyah to sit. "It's a long story," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And it's not an easy one to tell. But you deserve to know." As Aaliyah sat down, Judge Carter began to unravel the truth. She explained that years ago, when she was much younger, she had given birth to a baby girl, Aaliyah. At the time, she was a struggling law student with no support system, barely able to take care of herself, let alone a child. Overwhelmed and desperate, she had made the heartbreaking decision to place Aaliyah for adoption, believing it was the best chance for her to have a better life. "I never stopped thinking about you," Judge Carter said, her voice trembling slightly. "Not a day went by that I didn't wonder where you were, how you were doing. But when I finally had the means to look for you, I discovered you'd been placed into the foster system. I was too late." Tears streamed down Aaliyah's face as she absorbed the revelation. "You knew I was in foster care, and you didn't come for me." Judge Carter's eyes filled with tears. "By the time I found out, I was already a judge. There were rules, ethical boundaries that I couldn't cross. I thought about stepping down, about doing whatever it took to bring you home, but I was terrified of making things worse for you. I didn't want to disrupt your life even more than it already had been." Aaliyah shook her head, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and confusion. "But you're my mother," she said, her voice cracking. "Didn't that matter more than your job?" "It mattered more than anything," Judge Carter said firmly. "But I didn't want to fail you again. I thought the best thing I could do was to be a part of your life in the only way I could, by helping you through the system, even if you didn't know who I was." The weight of her words settled over them, filling the room with a heavy silence. Aaliyah didn't know what to think, what to feel. Her whole life, she had dreamed of finding her biological mother, of being reunited with a person who had brought her into the world. But she had never imagined it would happen like this, with so much pain and so many unanswered questions. "Why now?" Aaliyah asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why tell me now?" Judge Carter reached across the table, her hand resting gently on Aaliyah's. "Because I see how strong you are, how much you've grown," she said. "And because I want you to know that you were never unwanted." I loved you then, and I love you now. I've always loved you. The words broke something open inside Aaliyah. She had spent her whole life feeling like a burden, like an afterthought in the lives of others. But here, in this moment, she felt seen, valued, and loved in a way she never had before. The days following the revelation were a blur of emotions for Aaliyah. She struggled to reconcile the image of Judge Carter, the poised, authoritative figure she had admired from afar, with the reality of Olivia Carter, her biological mother. She found herself vacillating between anger and gratitude, hurt and hope. She wanted to forgive, but the wounds of her past made it hard to let go of the pain. Judge Carter, for her part, was patient. She gave Aaliyah the space she needed while making it clear that she was there for her, no matter what. She sent letters, small tokens of her love, and even arranged to meet with Aaliyah's social worker to discuss ways to support her without violating any ethical boundaries. One day, Aaliyah found herself flipping through the letters Judge Carter had written. Each one was filled with heartfelt words of encouragement and love, as well as stories from her own life, moments of struggle, triumph, and regret. For the first time, Aaliyah saw her mother not as a distant authority figure, but as a person who had made mistakes, suffered consequences, and still found a way to rise. The turning point came during a mentorship session. Aaliyah stood up in front of the group, sharing her story for the first time. She spoke about her struggles in the foster system, her dreams of becoming a lawyer, and the discovery of her connection to Judge Carter. As she spoke, her voice steady but full of emotion, she felt the weight of her pain begin to lift. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Judge Carter stood at the back of the room, her eyes shining with pride and tears. In that moment, Aaliyah realized that while their journey was far from over, they had already taken the first step toward healing, together. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation. Aaliyah sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her social worker, Ms. Ramirez, sat beside her, offering quiet words of encouragement. But today was different from all the other court hearings Aaliyah had attended. Today wasn't about placement or custody. Today was about something deeper, something personal and profound. Judge Olivia Carter entered the courtroom with her usual composed demeanor, her robe flowing as she took her place at the bench. But for those who knew her well, there was a slight difference in her expression. Her eyes seemed softer, her posture less rigid. She glanced briefly at Aaliyah, who looked back with a mix of determination and vulnerability. The hearing began as a routine session, with legal formalities and procedural language filling the air. But as it progressed, Aaliyah could feel the weight of the moment building. This wasn't just another hearing. This was a crossroads in her life. She had spent countless nights thinking about what she wanted to say, but now, as the opportunity drew closer, her nerves threatened to overwhelm her. When the time finally came, Judge Carter addressed Aaliyah directly. "Ms. Matthews," she said, her voice steady but kind, "you requested to speak today. The floor is yours." Aaliyah stood, her knees trembling slightly as she faced the courtroom. She glanced around, noting the curious expressions of the small audience, other foster youth, social workers, and a few family court staff. But her focus quickly returned to Judge Carter, whose eyes held a quiet encouragement that steadied Aaliyah's resolve. Taking a deep breath, Aaliyah began to speak. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each word, "I've been in the foster system for as long as I can remember. I've been moved from home to home, never staying in one place long enough to feel like I belonged. For years, I told myself that I didn't need anyone, that I could make it on my own. But the truth is, I've always wanted one thing, a family." She paused, glancing at Judge Carter, whose expression remained unreadable but attentive. "When I met you, I didn't know what to expect," Aaliyah continued. "I thought you were just another judge, someone who would make a decision about my life and move on. But you didn't. You saw me. You listened to me. And then you told me the truth about who you are, about the connection we share." Her voice cracked slightly, and she took another deep breath to steady herself. "I know it wasn't easy for you to tell me that. And I know our situation is complicated. But you're not just a judge to me. You're my mother. And no matter what happens here today, I need you to know that." A gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a heavy silence. Judge Carter's composure faltered for a brief moment, her lips pressing together as she blinked rapidly, as if holding back tears. Aaliyah pressed on, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't blame you for what happened in the past. I know you made the choices you thought were best at the time. But I want you to know that I forgive you. And more than that, I love you." By now, tears were streaming down Aaliyah's face, but she didn't care. "I spent my whole life wondering if I was enough, if I was worth loving, worth fighting for. And when I look at you, I see someone who cares, someone who believes in me. And that means everything." The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone present. Even the most hardened social workers and court staff were visibly moved, some dabbing at their eyes with tissues. Ms. Ramirez placed a comforting hand on Aaliyah's shoulder, her own expression a mixture of pride and emotion. Judge Carter took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Aaliyah," she began, her professional facade cracking to reveal the depth of her feelings, "you have shown more courage and strength than most people do in a lifetime. I cannot begin to express how much your words mean to me. You are more than enough. You always have been." Her voice broke slightly, and she paused to collect herself. "The decisions I made in the past were out of fear of not being able to give you the life you deserved. But I see now that the greatest gift I could have given you was my presence, my love. I will carry that regret for the rest of my life. But today, I want to make a promise to you. I am here for you in whatever way you need me." Tears streamed freely down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. "You are my daughter, Aaliyah," Judge Carter said, her voice firm despite the emotion. "And I am so proud of the young woman you've become." The courtroom erupted into applause, the tension breaking as the audience expressed their support. Aaliyah felt her heart swell with a mixture of relief, joy, and love. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, truly valued. She wasn't just another foster kid. She was a daughter. After the hearing, Aaliyah and Judge Carter sat together in the judge's chambers, away from the prying eyes of the courtroom. They talked for hours, sharing stories, memories, and hopes for the future. For Aaliyah, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she wasn't defined by her past, but by the love and support she had found in the most unexpected place. Judge Carter began taking steps to formally establish a legal relationship with Aaliyah, navigating the complex ethical and legal boundaries of her role. It was a challenging process, but they faced it together, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Months after Aaliyah's emotional plea in the courtroom, the pieces of her life began to fall into place. Judge Olivia Carter had committed herself fully to being the mother Aaliyah had always needed. While the legal process to formalize their relationship was fraught with challenges, ethical reviews, court approvals, and the scrutiny of the family court system, neither Aaliyah nor Judge Carter wavered in their resolve. They knew their bond was unshakable, and they were determined to make it official. The day of the final hearing was a crisp autumn morning, the air filled with the scent of fallen leaves. Aaliyah sat in the courthouse lobby, her heart pounding as she clutched a small, worn photo album in her hands. The album was a gift from Judge Carter, filled with photographs and mementos from their growing relationship over the past months. Pictures of their first dinner together, snapshots from Aaliyah's debate competitions, and handwritten notes from Judge Carter that reminded Aaliyah she was loved. Judge Carter arrived shortly after, dressed in a tailored suit rather than her judicial robe. She looked poised but nervous, her usual confident demeanor softened by the weight of the day's importance. When she saw Aaliyah, her face broke into a warm smile, and she crossed the room to hug her tightly. "You ready for this?" Judge Carter asked, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. Aaliyah nodded, her voice trembling with anticipation. "More than ready." The two entered the courtroom together, greeted by a small crowd of supportive faces. Ms. Ramirez sat near the front, smiling warmly at Aaliyah, and several of Judge Carter's colleagues were present, their expressions a mixture of pride and admiration. Even Benny, the owner of Aaliyah's favorite diner, had come to show his support, holding a small bouquet of daisies he planned to give her afterward. The presiding judge, a colleague of Judge Carter's, began the proceedings with a formal tone. "We are gathered here today to consider the petition for legal guardianship of Aaliyah Matthews by Judge Olivia Carter. Given the unique circumstances of this case, I've reviewed the details with the utmost care." The judge's words carried weight, but the atmosphere in the courtroom was one of hope. Aaliyah sat beside Judge Carter, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She glanced at her soon-to-be mother, who gave her a reassuring nod. When the judge turned to Aaliyah, she spoke with warmth. "Miss Matthews, do you understand what this petition means and what it will entail?" "Yes, Your Honor," Aaliyah said, her voice clear and steady. "It means I'll finally have a family. It means I'll have someone who loves me and believes in me. And it means I'll get to call Judge Carter what I've wanted to call her since the day she told me the truth, my mom." The room fell silent as the weight of Aaliyah's words settled over everyone present. Judge Carter reached over to squeeze Aaliyah's hand, her own eyes brimming with tears. The judge smiled gently before turning to Judge Carter. "And Ms. Carter, are you prepared to take on a role of legal guardian, understanding the responsibilities and privileges that come with it?" Judge Carter's voice was firm, her emotions barely contained. "Yes, Your Honor. I've been ready for this my whole life." The judge nodded, her expression softening. "In that case, it is my honor to approve this petition. From this day forward, Aaliyah Matthews, you are officially under the legal guardianship of Olivia Carter. Congratulations." Applause erupted in the courtroom, tears flowing freely among those gathered. Aaliyah and Judge Carter embraced tightly, both overwhelmed with emotion. For Aaliyah, it was a moment she had dreamed of her entire life, a moment when she finally felt like she belonged. The celebration that followed was small but heartfelt. At a local park, Aaliyah's closest friends and supporters gathered to mark the occasion. There was laughter, music, and even a cake decorated with the words "Welcome home, Aaliyah" in bright frosting. Aaliyah couldn't stop smiling, her heart full in a way it had never been before. Judge Carter presented her with a small box during the celebration. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a pendant shaped like a tree, a symbol of growth, strength, and connection. "This is for you," she said, fastening it around Aaliyah's neck. A reminder that no matter what happens, we're rooted together now. Aaliyah hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, savoring the words she had longed to say for so many years. As the weeks turned into months, Aaliyah and Judge Carter settled into their new life together. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet moments of connection. Aaliyah thrived in school, fueled by the knowledge that she finally had someone cheering her on. She began preparing for college, with dreams of becoming a lawyer like her mother, a dream that now felt within reach. Judge Carter, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. For years, she had poured herself into her work, striving to help children like Aaliyah find stability. But now she understood the true power of love and connection. She wasn't just a judge anymore. She was a mother. Years later, Aaliyah stood on a stage at her law school graduation, delivering a speech to a packed auditorium. She spoke about her journey, her struggles, and the people who had shaped her along the way. "There's one person who changed my life forever," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "She taught me that love and resilience can overcome even the hardest circumstances. And she reminded me that I am enough, just as I am." In the audience, Judge Carter sat front and center, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter take the next step in her incredible journey.